declared at that time. Now we move to item 3, public participation. Item 3.1, the public forum, and we've got Sam Butcher from the Imagination Station who's with us this morning. Sam, good morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming along. You've got 5 minutes to address the council on anything you choose to talk to us about. Away you go.
Thank you very much for having me here this morning. It's wonderful to be able to speak to you all in this format. It's a wonderful thing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sam Butcher. I'm the Managing Director at Imagination Station. There you go. Is that going to make it easier for you to hear me? I'm Managing Director at Imagination Station, and we are a charity that is grassroots here in Christchurch that works with Lego education, and we're working with your Central City Library, Tauranga, and it's a beautiful opportunity to be partnering with you, and so here I am. Now, before getting into things too seriously, I'd like to really thank this council for your support over the years, specifically Vicky Buck and Jamie Goff for supporting us through your CCHL directors fees a couple of years ago. We literally wouldn't be here without that. So thank you very much for your support and the wider support that you represent from the city. Now the reason I'm here this morning is twofold. Firstly, I wanted to personally give you an update on how things are going for Imagination Station in Tauranga. And secondly, I'd like to share with you some of our recent experiences regarding fundraising and consider some of the council's own outlined priorities in the long-term plan. So firstly, Tauranga, it's a beautiful building, well done, and it's been a real privilege to work with this council in activating that building. When we first started discussing with the libraries about what synergies there might be and how we would activate the building, we weren't really sure how that would look, but I have some statistics which may be of interest to you that really show what a success this partnership has been. So based on the first 6 months, we're expecting to see approximately 120,000 people through our space alone in Tauranga. Now that's a significant increase from the 47,000 we expected the year before that, and so that's a huge growth which is testament to the success of the building. Now we've taken hundreds and hundreds of surveys from the public who use our space, and we've learnt that 55% of our visitors come to Tauranga specifically for Imagination Station, which is an excellent success for us, but also for Tauranga itself. And as we survey them further, we learn that 55% of those, so that's about 70,000 extra visitors to Tauranga, and 80% of those people are also using library services while they're coming to Imagination Station. So that shows a huge synergy in the partnership. If we take a wider perspective of what impact this has on the central city, we learn that 61% of our visitors also go on to use other activities and other shops in the central city. So it's really activating the city as a whole, which is fantastic. Now, we also ask our visitors why they come, and we typically get answers that fall into 4 key areas. They come to spend quality time with family, which is a brilliant thing for the city. They come to learn. We run a range of education classes that a diverse range of people come to. They come to be creative, and they come to relax. And that's a huge success in our eyes because that's what we're trying to achieve. But I think it's also a huge testament to success of the council that this building has enabled that to be prioritised, and also that you have a community below you who are willing and able to engage in these kinds of activities, which is a real success. Our visitors are, as it says, actively learning, they're excited for the future, and they're inspired, which is a great thing for this community that you represent. Now, the second thing I quickly wanted to touch on was a bit about Imagination Station's position going forward. As you've been able to see, Tauranga itself has had immense benefits for us, but there has been 2 costs that we've noticed. The first cost is that most of our public visitors now assume that we are a council initiative, which is wonderful for all of you, but unfortunately has represented itself in a 76% decrease in public donations, which is a serious threat to us, and we're taking that quite seriously. It's a serious challenge. And secondly, a number of our key funders, including this council unfortunately, have suggested that our move into Tauranga should mean that we need specifically a lot less funding. Now, unfortunately, that's simply not true. Despite having over 60 volunteers working for us now, our largest expense always has been and continues to be staffing. Now, given a 115% increase in visitors, we actually need more funding now than we have previously, and so that's a serious consideration. I trust that all of you are aware that your own long-term plan says that this city should be a city of recreation, fun and creativity, And so we believe that we represent that. And so as you come to consider the Strengthening Communities Fund later on this year, I humbly ask that you would keep that priority in mind, keep our successes in mind, and keep the impact that we're having in the region in mind. I hope you've found it helpful to learn a little bit about us. I'm conscious that we do only have 5 minutes, and so I'll open it up for questions if we have time for that. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening.
And unfortunately, you haven't left time for questions.
Sure.
Your presentation took exactly 5 minutes, so the timing
Brilliant.
was perfect. But thank you very much indeed for the update. Recreation, fun and creativity clearly is what your activity represents, and we've understood very clearly the message that you've brought this
Brilliant.
morning. So thank you very much indeed for doing
Thanks,
so.
Andrew.
Thank you. So just to make a couple of comments about the conduct of the meeting from here, we've got 8 deputations on item 22, which we'll be taking next. That'll take us to just before 11 o'clock. Each of those deputations will have 10 minutes, including time for questions, and I intend to enforce that 10 minutes very strictly. We're going to need to because of the number of deputations that we've got this morning. That'll see us with a morning tea break at around about 11 o'clock. Then we've got 7 community boards, which will be giving 10 minutes each to present their reports, again, including time for questions. That should take us to a little bit after 12 o'clock, at which point I intend to deal with the Part A's coming from the community boards and then move immediately to item 22. So for those people that are here making deputations to item 22 this morning who are wanting to be in the chamber when we debate that item, it's likely that that will happen somewhere between 12:15 and maybe 1 o'clock or just after. So just in terms of the community board chairs and representatives planning their time this morning, it's unlikely that we'll get to you before 11 o'clock. And for the people that are here for item 22, it's likely that we'll get to that item sometime after 12 o'clock. But of course, we've got the deputations to hear first, which we'll do next. So now let's immediately move to those deputations by appointment. And I would call Linda Burdicken, the chair, and Simon Brown, the vice chair of the South Shore Residents Association, to the table for the first of our 10-minute deputations on item 22. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Many thanks for allowing the South Shore Residents Association to speak at a deputation today to provide feedback on the proposed leadership transition from Regenerate to Christchurch City Council. Whilst South Shore Residents Association and our residents have had many issues with the City Council throughout the history of our city, we know that it is possible for us to be heard and to work together as we did successfully on the recent Section 71 matter. We have nothing positive to say about Regenerate, and we're not going to waste this moment. Instead, we will focus on these reports discovered at short notice without communication, which potentially have significant implications for our community. It is clear that Regenerate are not up to the task, and we agree with the reasons stated as to why to transition leadership. Our community are universally behind the need for robust flood protection along the estuary edge that respects and enhances the natural environment. That message has not changed for many years. We also agree with the estuary walkway proposed by CCRU. Throughout the history of our city, there's been precedent of poor treatment of the eastern suburbs. That does not make it okay when considering past council decisions. As the City Council will be aware, the previous estuary edge protection pre-earthquake was provided by individual property owners on the estuary edge, having lost that same fight before as a council decision. What is fundamentally different this time is CIRA partially demolished or left these earthquake-damaged defences, making the remaining 500 property owners more vulnerable than they were before. In many cases, scraping the land to a lower level and not reinstating ground levels is also an issue. The City Council will ultimately own the red zone land as an asset, but it will need to be protected. We don't have an answer as to who is responsible, as it is surely complex legally. However, that increased risk must not fall to existing private property owners as a result of decisions made by an adjoining property owner, be that Sierra, Linds, or someone else, as we have raised before in previous submissions. With regard to the options presented, we are heartened that the City Council are considering human welfare, health and well-being in this issue for the first time. Perhaps that is thanks to the How team. We also commend the idea of splitting earthquake repair and adaptation processes as proposed by option 2. However, this option does not go far enough to address human well-being and social repair in the short and medium term, and only adds uncertainty, which is a serious concern. We cannot have a situation where past wrongs on earthquake repairs do not proceed because of predetermined adaptation plans, as could occur with either option 1 or option 2. Such an approach will confirm to our residents that retreat has always been and always will be the intention. We continue to strongly support option 3 presented by CCRU, the key focus being social repair and addressing the undue stress, health and well-being challenges for our community. We do not agree with the negative comments made regarding the CCRU option. Council analysis of option 3 states no wider community consultation has been undertaken, but it has been. The whole South Shore community has been consulted on the estuary edge protection by the Residents Association, including surveys, public meetings and the OSEL report. The response was compelling. Council analysis also states option 3 has taken away investigation, which to us is odd because any solution or option would need to be investigated and the scope of work produced. We refute impact on Mana Whenua in option 3 because engagement with Ngāi Tahu is a requirement of the district plan and would always be included in appropriate council works. Ngāi Tahu will need to agree and they are a key stakeholder. Reduced reliance on physical structures, stated in the council report, is again a misnomer in Christchurch because we rely on stop banks throughout the city, including the Waimakariri stop banks and many others. Finally, we note a comment in the matrix at the back of the report regarding the CCRU option, option 3, that repairs of the estuary edge will send a message of perceived safety and encourage development. If that was the case, we should not have rebuilt Christchurch and we should all be leaving New Zealand. It is precisely that feeling of safety that our residents are looking for and deserve. We also note reference throughout the report that there are no predetermined outcomes. Having done almost nothing for the last 9 years since the earthquake is a clear demonstration of a predetermined outcome. What makes our residents really angry is being singled out and treated differently to other equally valid parts of the city. The wonderful sea defences and walkway being built in Sumner, for example. We look forward to collaborating with the City Council, being treated fairly and working with you to look after the best interests of our residents and communities. So you, as councillors, have the opportunity today to facilitate a decision that allows our community to finally recover and look to the future. An opportunity not to be missed in an election year. Our community will always remember those who stood up for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now that allows just under 5 minutes for questions. Are there any questions? Jimmy.
Just one question quickly regarding to the lost strategy plan. The contents no any difference, am I right?
So
contents regarding strategy plan, because option 3 is also you would like to is protection first and also control those erosion and inundation. Then
yes.
we'll adapt those strategy plan.
Doing the earthquake repairs first is definitely send the right message to the community. And after that, adaptation. That's a long-term plan, but we need the immediate security.
So only difference is kind of do those kind of the protection and the control first.
Yes.
Then adapt.
Agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Kia ora, thank you. A quick question on the adaptation conversation. While the getting on with the earthquake legacy issues is key for your area, the adaptation conversation has to happen with a wider area in Christchurch, so along the entire coast and including Banks Peninsula. That conversation really needs to start now. If that conversation started now, would you want to be part of it, or would you want to wait till your earthquake stuff was finished and then be behind the rest of the city when it came to that conversation?
We definitely want to be part of the conversation. We definitely want to collaborate, and we definitely want. I mean, it's our assets and our future. Of course, we want to be part of the conversation. The only thing that we're with our reservation is that we can't have decisions about adaptation plans stopping earthquake repairs from happening. So,
that's
so
right.
they've got to be completely de-linked as a set of decisions.
That's right.
If you need to programmatically, you want to start thinking about adaptation, of course you can start, but don't let that influence the earthquake repairs.
Yeah,
is our point.
So having a conversation about adaptation on a citywide basis around the coastlines and up the rivers and with the wider community, at the same time but separate to the earthquake legacy issues.
Yep.
Yep. That's actually option 2.
But
As long
I
as
think
it
you
was,
have, from the community's point of view, we need to send a message of hope.
That's right.
Because I think what will happen if you want to start an adaptation plan before anything is visibly happening on the ground, you might not get the kind of the engagement that you want. So you need to kind of rebuild some confidence, and then I think you'll have a stronger conversation about adaptation.
That's it.
Do you know what I mean?
But we do have those broader citywide issues that we need to start those conversations.
We have citywide. It's a citywide issue.
So if we had
climate
resolutions-
change is a citywide issue. It's not a South Shore issue. That's one of our issues.
And that's the key thing, right?
I agree.
So if we had resolutions today which were very clear and very direct and much more direct than the current ones are on those, getting on with those earthquake legacy issues, would you be more comfortable with having that adaptation conversation as part of a wider community conversation?
We're more comfortable with what CCIU are presenting. Option 2 has been presented in a way where it looks like the two things are going to be tied together. I mean, we didn't have very much time. We discovered these on Friday night, and I think...
So being really clear about decoupling them is the key
Being
thing
really
for you.
clear about decoupling them is our main issue with it, yeah.
Thank you. That's useful. I will allow one more question from Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda and
Simon.
Simon. It is Simon, along with the other Simon. Just on the estuary edge itself, could you please describe what for you restoration and repair looks like?
I think it's repairing the estuary edge protection to the same level it was pre-earthquake. I mean, many of those walls have also been broken, disrepair, and some have been gone all together. We've got a pile of dirt as a temporary bund, but it's not in the same condition it was pre-earthquake, and it's actually really distressing for the residents to go and look at. You know, it's nearly 10 years on, and we've still got these busted walls along the edge, and we've got to be, and that really damages people over time. So it looks, you know, as it did pre-earthquake without any houses, is really what it needs to look like. All right.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. What I will do, I'm aware there are other people that were indicating questions that didn't get the opportunity to ask questions of this particular deputation. I'll make sure that people do get an opportunity to ask questions fairly as we move through the other deputations. So thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and address us this morning.
You're welcome.
The message is clear and I think
opportunity.
has been confirmed by the answers to some of those questions as well. So thank you very much indeed. Moving on to our next deputation, I would call Dr. John Cook to the table, please. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. You also have 10 minutes, which would allow time for questions if you choose. Thank you.
Iti ka unahera tēnā koutou. Ka tiwa mo ti whakapā nā raru. O huatai mi kaira roro. Aku mihi uruha ki a koutou mo tēnā. Tēnā koutou katoa. It is time to heal. I'm John Cook. I'm a general practitioner in the eastern suburb. I'm a resident, third generation, living in South Brighton. The effects of climate change are devastating. This devastation is characterised in no clearer form than in the people of South Brighton and South Shore. The devastation we see as medical providers is expressed through the mental health of our whānau. In this environment, catastrophisation can occur and is occurring. Terminology used by media can be deliberately extreme. This has a profound effect on mental health. Tenets of good governance include honest community engagement, fairness and equity. It is not without thought that I have come here fully aware I need to protect and respect doctor-patient confidentiality. However, I believe I can freely discuss the cumulative burden of many weary, damaged individuals. I have the ongoing privilege to be involved in our community at the centre of engagement, sometimes in the very dark places in people's hearts, minds and souls. Our practice cares for 12,500 individuals in the area and we are better equipped than most to observe our community's response in times of trauma. The very thought of climate change and the enormity of the problems that it presents will and does overwhelm a significant group of vulnerable people. This causes overactivation of our flight-fight safety response mechanism, medically known as a hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. There is a significant proportion of people that struggle with the constant stimulation of their HPA axis. This is expressed through family failure, violence, drugs, excess alcohol, neglect, anxiety, mood disorders, reactivation of psychoses, and post-traumatic stress disorders. Chronic activation of the flight-fight response leads to a sharp increase in the incidence of fatigue, fibromyalgia, brain fog, and other distressing syndromes. The individuals who are vulnerable often feel powerless to influence outcomes, and as such become disconnected from their ability to be effective, connected humans. This has a profound ramification, with the ultimate disconnect being disconnection from self, and this is what we see in attempted and successful suicide. The reason I bring this to your attention is that continued uncertainty around the management of equity, safety, and future of the communities in South Brighton and South Shore has led many residents into very dark and unhealthy places. They struggle with the inequities of opportunity, transport, roading, footpaths, bridges. They struggle with the obvious spend inequities on our neighbours. The elderly struggle to remain in their familiar environment. Stressed children are far more prone to become dysfunctional adults, and to miss this is seemingly endless battle is tragic. Our next generation minds come first. Our decisions matter. The personal tragedies that I am witness to as a result of this effect of climate change are profound. We have a responsibility as leaders to provide an environment in which stressed communities can heal. We have had 9 years of indecision and fighting. You, individually as councillors, have a responsibility here through your decision-making today to potently affect the outcome for these individuals and their whānau. Individual professional trajectories need to be contained. There is no decision here. You have had enough reports and recommendations. Today, our seaside community want your support. I believe the best support is provided by option 3, that which gives immediate on-ground activity, hope. We know this will instill confidence, engagement, and recovery. Irrespective of how you manage the estuary edge and the projected long-term effect of climate change, there are 500 families that you are responsible for now. They would not be in this position were it not for the earthquakes. The earthquake ruptured our village. Your decision corrodes our soul. Our ground continues to shake as we and our families grow old. I want you to bring humanity to the estuary edge we live by. We need you to resolve our fate, so in peace in our land we can lie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That does leave just over 3 minutes for questions. Are there any questions for Dr. Cook? Phil.
Thank you very much, John, for your deputation. One disadvantage with where I'm leading to is I'm wondering, in fact, if there's somewhere in between here that we can resolve this, because a clear disadvantage with option 3 is that it would place a risk to council and if we adopt option 3 in itself, and that's quite clear in the report. So would you be open to us finding a kind of hybrid solution, a way in between this, between the options?
I'm talking from a personal point of view. I don't represent a group. I trust you to make the right decision now. I think we're at a point where healing has to occur. So in your wisdom, if you find that this is the best way forward, yes, of course I would accept that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Anne.
A lot about disempowerment and a sense of not having any control, and you've talked about tangible things that could happen that would strengthen a sense of power in this situation. What would that look like? What would those tangible things, do you think, look like?
Isn't it interesting, things in life that matter aren't things, but in actual fact, what was very uplifting in our community was to see the wharf rebuilt in such a fine style. To see things going ahead within New Brighton is very rewarding. So I think our community is ready for any obvious changes. I think they need to be physical. I think they need to be seen.
Great.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thanks. So we've got the earthquake damage and those legacy issues which you've talked about really strongly, and we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the earthquake. But the broader issues of climate change and sea level rise would be there without the earthquake, and they also cause a lot of anxiety and stress throughout the wider area. And we need to deal with both of those. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And one final question from Jimmy.
One question, Dr. Cho. Do you think the option 3, because particular focus on risk reduction, can mitigate all those negative things you mentioned earlier, like the equity or the safety or those some people particular anxiety? So this option 3 can all mitigate those effects.
What I do know is that when you remove hope, all things go. If you have hope, then solutions are available. But if we remove hope, then we have nothing. So you ask me, are those solutions going to change? Obviously, I believe they will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come along this morning. Again, some very clear messages. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So now moving to our third deputation of the morning, Hugo Christensen, representing the South Brighton Residents Association. Hugo, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the table. You also have 10 minutes to speak with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you all for this opportunity to again express our concerns about the endless delays of the recovery. One part of South Brighton appears to be forced into a system designed to address future sea level rise. Some areas of the suburb have subsided, equivalent to about 100 years of sea level rise through land subsidence. The damage was caused by the earthquakes. The damage was insured. And we hope that lessons can be learned from the past. In places where strong earthquakes strike, they are likely to strike again. And the effect of further earthquakes of the magnitude experienced in 2011 would be horrendous in the eastern suburbs. Throughout the period following the earthquake, the South Brighton Residents Association has repeatedly brought to your attention the misreporting of information relating to the damage caused by the earthquakes. Regenerate Christchurch and the Community Board have shown no interest in investigating the errors we pointed out in 2017. That's where the regeneration was handled from Regenerate back to Council. It's gone back to Regenerate, and we are now in a position where it's going to be pushed back again. Significant resources have been allocated to produce unreliable information that is totally unsuited for decision-making. Decision-making purposes pursuant to Section 71 to 86 of the Local Government Act. Particularly reprehensible is the fact that this relates to life safety for vulnerable people, people who have been left behind the so-called recovery. We therefore urgently request a proper assessment of hazards in compliance with the NZS 31,000-2018 risk management principles and guidelines. An assessment of the annual fatality risk should be carried out before any further action is taken. In detail, we request the following: identification and quantification of tectonic subsidence, land subsidence in terms of the Christchurch City datum, fault lines in the South Brighton area, the seismic risk, the increased flood risk, the current flood risk, the calculated velocity of water based on land elevation, drainage points versus top of high tide, and tsunami risk, and the consequences of a 1 in 50-year tsunami at the high tide based on current land elevation. So, we have provided information to you here which actually contradict what Council is using for their assessment of life safety. We produced the bigger picture, which shows the actual elevation of the area on the South Brighton Spit. And what you can see there is that the area of South Shore is at much higher elevation than the area in South Brighton. Just to make this very simple, we put some gumboots in front of the flood protection just to show you what this looks like in relation to human being. And when you look at the area in South Brighton, where you see the elevation is the lowest in the city and well below the high tide, you can imagine a person in these gumboots, an adult person would not withstand the Pacific Ocean breaking through, and that is something that will eventually happen. And people have been put in this position. They are waiting for this to happen. They are being told by everyone. They're scared shitless. Sorry for the language. They are scared. And they are left to face this. And we are being told that there's no flood risk. So I ask you guys to, stop concerning yourselves about the risk that Christchurch City Council is facing and address the people that have been left there. So the risk to council is one thing, but the risk to human lives following a disaster is of higher importance. At the back side of this document, there is a reference to evidence of Janice Carter, which submitted on behalf of Christchurch City Council. He goes into detail about the assessment of risk to life. And what we have here in Christchurch is that risk to life has been assessed in the Port Hills. But somehow someone made the decision that the risk to life is of less consequences in the coastal areas than it is on the Port Hills. This is not acceptable. You have a system in place here, which was introduced by Wendy Saunders, which is referred to in Janice Carter's submission, which calls for an immediate action if risk to life is in excess of international standards. People should be held accountable and action should be taken, not as per your proposed plan to leave the decision till August or continue to delay these difficult positions. You're dealing with human beings, human rights have been breached, and we would like to see some actual action here. not a delay 5 minutes before the next elections. We would like to see you guys to step up and deal with this situation. So I would love to answer some questions in regard to this.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thanks for drawing attention to this handout that you'd provided before the meeting as well. So that does leave us about 3 minutes for questions. Other questions for Hugo? Dion.
Well, I just want to understand, in light of what the last speaker was speaking about, the amount of time and effort that you, in your situation and the people around you have put in. What's been the impact that this long, drawn-out process so far has had on yourselves and others around you?
It is a total nightmare. We've been fighting brick walls for many, many years, dealing with multiple authorities, ministers, and it's a brick wall. We have applied for funding for the Residents Association, and when we introduced this particular information and we requested funding to do further investigation and reporting, we were asked to withdraw our application for funding, and we never received any funding. And we've been starved of funding. And this has had, very, very significant impact on our lives, on our communities, and it's devastating. This has been documented in the newspapers here. This is not what we should be expecting after a disaster.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Hugo, for once again taking the time to come along and address the Council. As with the other submitters, the points that you've made are very, very clear. Thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I'd call our fourth deputation to the table, representing Empowered Christchurch Limited, Seamus O'Crontha. So as with the other deputations, you have 10 minutes, and if you choose to allow time for questions, obviously that's something for you to choose to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora, kia tau. I'm representing Empowered Christchurch. Just to make clear, we're not restricted to the South Brighton, South Shore area. We have members from many different parts of Christchurch and beyond. But obviously, the discussion today is on the problems relating to the Brighton area. So you've had deputations from medical practitioners, residents associations, so I won't waste time by going over things that have already been said, but I'll try to respond to some questions that have been posed by councillors over the last week, just to clarify some things. Firstly, it's clear that we are at a crisis point here from what you've heard this morning. Communities have been fighting for their survival for the last 10 years. We are now at the point where many people don't know what to do because they have been blocked, because no decisions have been made. And I think at the root of things is land damage. Most of these problems relate to the fact that nothing was done by EQC and nothing was done by council after the earthquakes to raise land to protect it from erosion, flooding, high groundwater, and all the other problems that we see today. Discussions were held between EQC and council in 2014, proposing area-wide mitigation. Nothing was done on this matter, and this is why we are in the position we are in today. One councillor asked about the ISO 31000 risk standard. So just to explain that, if you take the example of the Port Hills, you decide what the risk to life is, and according to the ISO standard, if you have a risk of 1 in 10,000 of a fatality over the course of the year, that is intolerable. And that is the reason why homes were red stickered in the Port Hills. So if you contrast that with the coastal areas in Christchurch and in Canterbury generally, you have seismic risk, you have high groundwater, you have erosion, you have lateral spreading, you have liquefaction, you have insurance problems on top of that, which is not a natural hazard, but all of these problems combined, there must be a risk which is higher than 1 in 10,000. Therefore, the risk must be seen as intolerable. Therefore, action must be taken to mitigate or eliminate that risk. This is what we have not seen from the Council or any of the responsible authorities over the last 9 years. Risk-based planning is another thing that we should clarify. So risk-based planning says that rather like a triage system in a medical emergency, you look at the most vulnerable people, the people who are at risk most, and deal with them. I did a Red Cross training course many years ago in Christchurch, and one of the interesting things that our trainer told us was in a multiple pile-up situation, you do not pay attention to the people who are screaming loudly. You go to the people who are quiet, because they are the ones who cannot express what they are feeling. So it's rather the same here. The real victims of this situation are not myself and other people who are shouting loudly. They are the vulnerable people who have been left and swept aside, the people that Dr. Cook referred to earlier. So on the basis of risk-based planning, you should look after a fire that is beside an oil depot before you look at a fire which is in a quarry or a brickworks. That makes complete sense. The other matter I would like to point out is insurability. This is a huge financial problem for many people in the coastal areas, and it's the result of the whole recovery process where houses were not repaired, land was not repaired, and people do not have insurance. There is a growing pool of houses which are both earthquake prone, which should attract a higher risk assessment under the ISO standard than for life fatality risk. But this has not been done. More and more people have no insurance. More and more houses in the coastal areas are being sold and snapped up by speculators. And we're at the point where decisions have to be taken to spend a lot of money to safeguard people, to rescue the situation. This is a unique opportunity because you're in the middle of negotiating with the Crown. To go back in history, in 2014, Tonkin and Taylor estimated that land damage, the costs for EQC, would amount to $2.14 billion. They then revised this down by shaving a little off here, shaving a little off there. Then they introduced diminution of value. So this is particularly important for coastal properties. If you were at risk of flooding, EQC paid on average $25,000 per property and left people with the risk. The land was not remediated. The result of that is they have no insurance today. They have no mortgages today. So it's only a question of time before banks pull out, insurance pulls out, people are flooding, and they don't have the money to pay for it. Everything that they have saved for during their lives is gone, and their children and their families have no future. So I would ask, in the negotiations with Crown, ask where the money went for land remediation, which was estimated at $2.14 billion. Why was $525 million released to the Crown in the midst of the suffering in Christchurch? All of this money is really money that was stolen from what people should have received in the earthquake recovery and has disappeared. So in negotiations, ask the Crown, who's going to pay for this? Because otherwise, this will be an explosive disaster which will get worse and worse and worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Dion.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the payments from EQC on the increased land and flooding vulnerabilities. Do you think that process was wrong or not right? And the reason I'm asking is that there's the EQC inquiry at the moment where these feedback need to be also fed back into so that we don't do this again. But do you think this has increased the problems that we're seeing now?
Massively. I attended the EQC Land community information meetings, which they held, I think it was 2016, if I remember correctly. They produced an incredibly arcane, complicated incomprehensible system to explain how they were going to pay for increased liquefaction vulnerability based on a matrix, based on the value of properties before and after the earthquakes, based on technical reports from Tonkin and Taylor, which we now know left out key information and downplayed the actual damage. So yes, I think it's a huge influencing factor.
Make sure you feed that into the EQC inquiry as well.
We have made a detailed submission to the EQC inquiry, and we'll be meeting with Dame Sylvia later this month.
Thank you. Pauline.
Excuse me if I'm being ignorant here, but can the land be remediated, and how would that happen?
If you ask a structural engineer or a geotechnical engineer, all land can be remediated, but it's a question of what that will cost. And I think in the coastal suburbs, when you look at the condition of the soil, sandy, silty, it would be extremely expensive to remediate it. So this is why EQC has run away from the problem, and this is why we're in the situation we're in today. I think it would be horrendously expensive to do area-wide remediation, but if you're asking, I think one councillor asked during the week what proposals we could make to solve the problem. It seems to me that certain properties have to be retreated from. You cannot protect them. You have a temporary stop bank which has to be moved inland to provide more of a buffer zone. That is the least expensive solution to the problem. Provide protection where possible, where it makes sense for the next 100 years. Relocate people where it's too expensive and doesn't make sense for economic and social reasons.
And have you got any idea how many houses we might be talking about if you're looking at, relocating?
Well, a lot of the most immediate risk affects what is coincidentally or not coincidentally the residential unit overlay. So this was recently introduced by council. This has allowed people to rebuild without resource consents, which would make them build at higher levels and give them more protection. Mm-hmm. It also lets council off the hook because they would have a hazard notice if they built at lower level, and they would not be liable in the case of flooding. So I think a lot of the residential unit overlay will be the area affected on the estuary side to the centre, roughly, of the Brighton Peninsula.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for detailed answers to questions as well, and for joining us this morning. Thank you very much indeed. So I'd next call Jan Burney. Now, Jan, I note in the written notes that you've provided there are a number of references to Brooklands. Yes. The specific decision that we're making today relates to the regeneration strategy for South Shore and South New Brighton. So I just draw your attention to that. You have 10 minutes to present to us, allowing time for questions if you choose. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jan Burney. I live in Brooklands. I'm addressing the agenda, item 22. I'm aware that I am talking for Brooklands, but the decisions made in item 22, or the discussion, affects the other coastal communities as well, like ours. I'm a resident of the small rural residential settlement of Brooklands. There are approximately 19 privately owned properties remaining in our rent zone community. Item 22, 410 states. It was intended that regenerate strategy would inform changes to the district plan, either through the Regeneration Plan or Resource Management Act processes, along with the implementation actions. This was intended to be a pilot for the project for the adaptation planning and subsequent plan changes for all coastal communities in Christchurch, identified as being at risk from coastal hazards in the 2017 Coastal Hazard Assessment for the Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. Brooklands has a specific and unique environment. The impact of earthquake damage has been assessed, but no remediation or mitigation has been triggered as a priority. Each coastal community is unique, and a strategic overarching policy to create a project as a template is not appropriate. Conflating earthquake damage and coastal hazards adaptation will create an inequitable, unbalanced outcome unless informed discussion with specific communities affected takes place. The delay in the future use of Brooklands red zoning is having a detrimental effect upon our community and the wider Lower Styx catchment. The area has much to offer, but the potential has not been realised. Regenerate Christchurch State of Brooklands. We will continue to work with Brooklands community to better understand their priorities and determine an approach for regeneration planning in this area. We recognise that this area has unique circumstances and are likely to need a different approach from that proposed for the Otago River corridor. We need to gain a better understanding of the characteristics of Brooklands, including further information about the coastal influences. We will continue to be open, visible and respectful with this community as we progress the regeneration planning in this area for the future. As it is an extraordinarily detrimental for people, property and for the environment to continue to be captured in an interminable hold zone, to be continued abandoned by policy, planning and strategy. We may be small in number, but our community does matter. We matter, and we must, for our social, economic well-being and health, have a recovery and a pathway forward, some future to live to. Respect for people and communities includes care, consideration of rights, it includes informed decision making, it includes transparency, it includes truth. I am requesting an initial meeting with Regenerate Christchurch and partners to set up a community meeting for the Brooklands residential red zones residents in the very near future, to plan a way forward and to envisage a future. Thank you for your time and consideration of my request. I realise it's outside of scope, but I don't believe it is. This is about coastal communities and adaptation.
Yeah, and thanks for taking the time to come along and talk about the issues this morning.
Thank you.
You know, it certainly is part of the wider conversation, as you say. So that does leave us a few minutes for questions. Glenn and then Sarah. Glenn.
Thank you, Jan. That was great. Can you please take us into, or deeper into your sixth point, where you refer to conflating earthquake damage and coastal hazards? Could you please unpack that a bit more?
By conflating the earthquake damage and the coastal hazards at the initial document for the South Shore, South Brighton, the strategy, it eliminates the earthquake damage. The coastal hazard risk assessment will take a priority over the earthquake legacy damage. My opinion is if some of the earthquake damage is actually addressed, it could help along the adaptation process and shorten that process and decisions made upon that.
If I can just follow up on that, it'll help it along in terms of community openness or...
the transparency, information upgrading, an information vacuum currently exists, and what we are told is often not what we are seeing on the ground, like as per modelling, the Christchurch City Council modelling, the EQC, damage and risk assessments, insurance risks and assessments. Each entity has a different way of addressing the issue, but none of them address the issue. None of them have addressed the issues fully for people in those worst affected areas. There is a gap, there's a massive gap for those worst affected.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you very much. I don't think it's out of scope at all.
Thank you.
I think, so the two key points here seem to be, firstly, keeping those two issues separate, the earthquake issues and the future adaptation. And the other thing is that you don't want the work in your area to be held up by processes in another area. Is that right? You want to be able to start that work in your area as well.
Yes, yep. Our area is probably a little bit easier to do. It's a very small area, and it has multiple. We've got parks and reserves. We've got ECAN. We've got the river. We've got the Christchurch City Council. We have Regenerate Christchurch. We have red zones, and it might sound complicated, but if a discussion is had, some of the solutions could be far simpler.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of people. We don't trigger a priority because the amount of people that could be at risk. However, I'm looking, but I don't see that as an adequate explanation.
Okay.
If we can fix and have some conversations and get some resolution out of a smaller area, sometimes that could actually make it clearer for the larger, the more populated areas.
Yeah.
And if we can find some pathways through.
Okay,
for that discussion.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Yanni.
Yeah, thank you for the submission. I just want to understand, in terms of a way forward, whether it's a planning issue, as you said, whether we need changes to planning documents, or whether it's mainly around infrastructure repairs, infrastructure remediation.
Some of the planning documents for the red zone, the specific purpose flatland recovery zone, I see as an impediment to the recovery for individual and community. The specific purpose flatland recovery zone was solely to protect the Crown land. It's not to protect us.
So
it is solely and utterly to protect.
So the reason for asking it was to really understand whether we need to get like a regenerate plan with planning powers, or whether we just need an infrastructure sort of repair program. But it sounds like we need a regenerate plan.
We do need a plan. Where there's forget the strategy. The strategy has been delay. That is the strategy that has been. So that strategy was very effective. But what we want now is a plan, and the plan could include. We don't know, and from reading the documents, it's a little bit unclear on some of the legislative and statutory responsibilities held division between the council and Regenerate Christchurch, and how that takeover of the role, whether it is actually able to be done without a change in legislation.
Right, but just so I'm clear, in terms of your preference is, or the request is to get Regenerate through their annual work program to commit to timeframes for a regen plan for the Brooklands area.
Yes, and also, I've already had the discussion with the Working Party and through the global consent applications, stormwater consent applications, on the modelling and the the damage assessment to the river's edge, etc. Some of the modelling is extraordinarily suspect over the period of time. It's in fact, it needs an in-depth inquiry into some of the modelling over this period of time. I could document the different modelling, finished floor levels, for example, risk levels, model scenarios, and the assumptions that are put in. Some of them are quite outrageous. One of the assumptions for Brooklands is that the new subdivisions and planning, new subdivisions and development can go ahead in Brooklands because we have been abandoned. And that allows, and that's in planning and resource management documents for example, Preston's, the motorway. It's in our Styx SMP, produced by the council, that says Brooklands will be abandoned, therefore we can increase the flood risk. This is preempting, this is the council planning, strategy and policy, preempting the future use of the red zone.
There are certainly
our futures.
There are certainly some good points that you've made as part of the presentation and the answers to questions. Thank you very much indeed for that. Just noting your request, and noting that that's a request of Regenerate Christchurch rather than council, I noticed that we've got the Chief Executive of Regenerate Christchurch, Ivan Yaufeta, in the public gallery this morning. I don't doubt that he would have heard that request, and obviously we'd be very keen to see a way forward there, so thank you.
Briefly, as we're meeting what we had a couple of weeks ago with Leanne Dalzell, she suggested that she would get back to me on a meeting as well, so I see it as a joint, because we have joint issues in our area between Regenerate and Christchurch City Council. So if we can sort something out there.
I also had a word to our own Chief Executive while you were speaking, so we'll make sure that gets picked up in some meaningful way. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so our next deputation is from Christchurch Coastal Residents United, CCRU, and Simon Watts, the chair. Simon, good morning and welcome back to the table. It's only a few days since you were here as part of our annual plan process, so good to see you back here again, and thank you once again for taking the time to come and address Council. You have 10 minutes, including time for questions if you choose.
Thank you very much. We must stop meeting like this.
Or if it's useful, we must continue meeting like this.
Councillors, officers, CEO. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. My name is Simon Watts. I'm the chair of CCRU. Give me one minute. And we're here to address item 22 in your agenda. Okay, this report, we want to thank the authors. We appreciate the difficulties you have. We don't agree with all of it, but I'll explain why we don't agree with all of it. And before we start, the earthquake is a lens over everything here. These are very special circumstances where we have an adaptation requirement and an earthquake damage requirement, which has led CCRU to suggest that in this very special circumstance, we need pre-adaptation before adaptation. Okay, thank you, Council. Thank you, officers, for hearing a lot of what we have said to you and others have said to you. We agree with your rejection of option 1. We agree the Council should take back responsibility for the earthquake repair processes and adaptation. We agree that these two processes should be separated. We agree that the HOW teams should be supported and the engagement process they have developed should be used for adaptation. That's a lot of things to agree on. We disagree about option 2, which is the favoured option. It's attractive at face value, but we object to it for 2 reasons, the most important being it's structurally impossible. The blue colour, is my mouse? I don't know, okay. The blue colour here, on my slide anyway, is to represent coolness, coldness. The state of community well-being is very, very poor. There's not very much capacity there. The process has the idea that the community will engage in parallel with separate repairs and adaptation processes and end up as a resilient, adapted community. The end point, absolutely, is where we want to be. Unfortunately, the well-being status of the community is not sufficient to meaningfully engage in the adaptation process, which it has to be for you to get the best outcomes. The second reason is that the original CC policy decision, with complete respect to you all, to roll earthquake repairs into adaptation, we believe is fundamentally flawed and does not understand the special nature of where we are in terms of a post-earthquake situation. So where are we? We've got broken communities. 8 years later, nothing has happened. We've got fear and we've got growing uncertainty. I keep hearing that action to do things will affect the future route of adaptation. Well, non-action also affects the future route of adaptation. And the non-action is undermining community well-being, which means that the situation doesn't get better, it undermines the community. This link between action and social well-being is interesting. In your matrix, option 3, you cite as an objection to option 3 that it may improve psychosocial well-being. Unfortunately, psychosocial well-being is one of your legal responsibilities as a council. It's not an optional extra. CCRU would suggest that this previous policy of combining earthquake damage repairs with adaptation has undermined community well-being, and option 2, if it is very delayed with the work that you've suggested needs to be done, will do the same. Okay, so our objection to option 2 is we do not believe there is sufficient faith, trust or well-being to proceed it. And interestingly, the option commits to social and physical research only. This mouse is wonderful, but I keep losing it. There it is. Okay. Options 2 and 3 both require work and research beforehand, and from your document I've got these 3 areas that need research or work or understanding. This is a formal offer to you from CCRU to assist you to shorten the time this takes. The well-being state of the community, we heard John Cook earlier. You've got feedback from the HOW team, you've got feedback from the hub, you've got feedback from the community groups. I would suggest all of those results point the same way. You don't need more work to know that the well-being in this community is very, very poor and falling. Community consultation. Option 3, which is the one CCRU submitted, has the support of South Shore Residents Association, CCRU, the Community Board, and is also supported indirectly by the feedback you've had from the hub. I would suggest that attempting to do community consultation on this will fail because the communities are simply not willing to do it. The important one maybe is the impact of post-earthquake works on the estuary edge. Yes, you're going to use almost certainly LiDAR data before and after. The before data is shonky, and satellite data. We have a better suggestion or an additional suggestion. CCRU are prepared to share with you our photographic database, choose a few points on the estuary edge, and produce documents for you to show you before and after. And then, I'm sorry, an academic, take you on a short field course to those points with the documents you have to show you what we're talking about. We actually want to help. We want to speed this up. We think option 3 is the way forward so that you start the repairs. The community need to see to believe. They need a bit of faith here, which they haven't got. So start the earthquake repairs. You don't need to finish it. There's a concern about, before you start adaptation, there's a concern that this will hold up adaptation. We could do this in a couple of months and start some of this work. That's not a delay in the context of what you're talking about for adaptation. And then you heat the community temperature from cold to warm, allows the warm to engage in adaptation, and bingo, you're where you want to be. We won't have time for questions, I don't think, but I'm going to try. So in summary, repairs to increase the well-being, to sort the then allow to sort the adaptation. 2 points which I'm happy to take outside of the room. The matrix you're using we consider is flawed and not consistent with best practice. We suggest that you should be looking at a resilient sustainability matrix. Outside the room is fine, I won't take time up now. We want to help. Finally, unusually, a comment for the Chief Executive. You are adopting a business as usual approach to your staffing. So I know a member of the HOW team is now at new Greenfields in Auckland, and her position as a planning team leader is organised. Bless you, I think you have more planners than you can shake a stick at. This is opening up vulnerability for the council. We suggest future-proofing the council. We think you need adaptation experts. There are a lot of them in Australia, European Union, and the US. There are very few of them in New Zealand. Please think about this. We don't want to be here fighting you. We want to work with you. Okay, the rest you've already seen. I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to stop now so we do have some questions. Thank you.
Now that brings us right to bang on the 10 minutes. And as I indicated at the beginning of the meeting, we were going to need to enforce the 10-minute limit quite strictly. So it doesn't, unfortunately, allow time for questions, which is unfortunate. Thank you very much indeed for your observations. And also, I've noted that offer of data sharing as well, which we appreciate. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we've got 2 more deputations on item 22 to hear, and then we'll break for morning tea. So let's now move to the deputation from the Coastal Burwood Community Board, represented by Kim Money, the Chair, and Tim Sintus, the Deputy Chair. Welcome to the table. As with the other deputations, you know the drill, 10 minutes, including time for questions if you like.
Okay, I'll get Kim to give me a nudge if I go too far. So, look, you've heard a lot of the stories this morning. It's very similar to what I'm going to say, but as you might know, I'm a resident of South Shore and also on the community board, and I've been there for 4 terms. I'm going to share with you some history and what the South Shore residents have gone through since the earthquakes, and why today is so crucial for you to make the right decisions for this community's future. We've been advocating for South Shore's concerns to be heard for a long time. South Shore was the last suburb to find out that part of it was going to be red zoned after being zoned orange for a long time. It's a very stressful time for the community, not knowing what was happening with their lives and seeing other areas moving on. Finally, the decision was made to red zone the estuary front. As we know, it's an extremely hard time for a lot of people. Most of Christchurch knows about that. Residents were starting to adjust to the situation when the Coastal Hazard Chapter was revealed under the SERA emergency powers. It was perceived as a draconian type rule in a very, very difficult time, and potentially had the chance of doing a lot of damage. Suddenly the community had to rally around. You've got to remember, this is after the community's still fighting, getting over earthquakes, and suddenly they're having to fight this. Very, very tough time for everybody. A group of residents and business owners formed the group Christchurch Coastal Residents United, CCRU. With the help of the residents and them, they lobbied council and government, and finally common sense prevailed and the Coastal Hazard Chapter was taken out of the emergency powers in the district plan. A very stressful time for everyone involved. After the red zone land was cleared, the land had been artificially lowered by some demolition companies, and it was brought up to council many times by us. We lobbied council and MPs that the land was being lowered to the estuary, a metre down in places. All the photographs are there. Nobody listened, and it put the community at risk, so every time there was a storm event, we were on tenterhooks. Meanwhile, the residents watched Flockton Basin, Beachville Road and other areas having tens of millions of dollars spent on protection, and saw how these communities were made to feel safe. Can you imagine how disheartened South Shore and South Brighton residents were feeling, seeing other suburbs having this kind of money spent on their protection while there was nothing being spent on them? We've been told repeatedly you have a future problem with sea level rise, but there's no plans to fix it. So you're up a creek without a paddle. The community feels very deeply offended by this. In August 2017, we had a flood weather event and the street flooded. We told council it was going to happen. We've been expecting it for a long time. And unfortunately, all the weather systems came together a bit like winning lotto, only with worse consequences, a lot worse. All through the night, civil emergency was declared by the council. Contractors worked in atrocious conditions to fill up the gaps along the edge, which prevented the tide from further encroaching. And this emergency work in the middle of the night, I believe, cost the council $300,000 to $400,000, a small price to protect the community. This should never have happened. The council had been warned. the community was dreading that particular day. That night I felt ashamed at being part of a council that could have prevented this flooding, but had done nothing to protect them. Hearing rumours of letting the edge go back to nature does not so well with the community. That is not what the residents or insurance companies want to hear. They want assurance for their assets, their families and lives, and they want them to be protected. At the beginning of 2018, we started to hear stories from residents that they couldn't build on their sections or do alterations to their houses due to council regulations. We couldn't understand this, as many had attended the independent hearing panel and believed the ruling by the panel of putting a residential unit overlay, RUO, in place would enable residents in South Shore and Redcliffe to continue to build. This is just more stress for the community. We, Community Board, repeatedly brought this matter up at Council, and we were very concerned about the mental health issues arising from the stress that people are under. As you know, drastic action was taken, something which none of us wanted to do, but we felt we had no option as the community was hurting. The RUO was reinstated under Section 71, which the community are very grateful for. So thank you, Council, for the speed in which you did this. Personally, I was dealing with some extreme cases of broken people, marriage breakups and potential self-harm. I cannot thank my fellow Community Board members and our 2 councillors and our staff as we all worked together and got these community groups in to talk to. Then we hear potentially great news. Regenerate Christchurch is going to prepare a strategy plan for South Shore and South Brighton. The community was sceptical, perhaps scared of getting their hopes up once again, but nevertheless they got behind it. For almost 2 years they attended ongoing meetings and supported the How Team Hub and started to feel hopeful again. Can you imagine what they felt like when they heard that Regen was quitting, giving up and handing it back to Council? Devastated and angry springs to mind. Yet again the community has been let down. As you know, a lot of money was wasted as well, and time. It feels deeply offended by this again. Even this week, residents only found out they had 4 working days to do a submission, something they don't really understand, but so important for their future. Can you blame them for being angry and frustrated with these unnecessary, ongoing, stressful situations? For something so important as this, there must be a better way of communicating. I cannot speak highly enough of the South Shore Residents Association and CCRU and Parent Forces Society for helping to get the word out so quickly. I hope I've been able to enlighten you on what South Shore and South Brighton has had to go through over the past 9 years. No other suburb has had to endure so much unrelenting pressure or stress in their daily lives. This is a community that is strong, but is struggling with the no-action stance of Council and is worn out from battling. They have been consoled to death and just want action. And now today, you have a chance to put this right by listening to this community and giving them what they deserve: protection, security for their immediate future, and most importantly, peace of mind so they can just move on with their lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Our communities have spoken. So our role as elected representatives, as you know, is to represent and act as an advocate for the interests of our community council. We have done that on these issues for years. The board and our residents should not be continually pleading and asking their council for safety and surety, which is a duty of care. Getting to this point has taken far, far too long. We need to get on the same page as the rest of the city. We need to get rid of this daily visual barrier that constantly contributes to the, as you have heard, to the psychological damage of our residents. We know it's been a difficult time for all of us, so let's seize this opportunity to put an end to this incredible traumatic time for them. We appreciate the staff recognition of urgency. Today is your chance to show these communities with your vote, your commitment to them by endorsing option 3 in the report, as our Community Board has, and the recommendations that will be proposed by Councillor David East later today. As you have heard this morning by Dr John Cook and other residents, delivery of earthquake repairs will positively impact and improve our residents' wellbeing, therefore empowering them to recover from the earthquakes, which will then enable them to focus on the adaptation planning conversations. Today is the day to look at this differently, together, Community Board and you. We can leave this morning knowing we have given these residents of our city some hope. Please do this for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That does leave just over a minute for questions. So Sarah and then Phil, if there's time. Sarah.
Hi, thank you. Just really quickly, Tim, you mentioned the coastal hazards section of the district plan that was taken out after some really strong community advocacy. Now, we're legally obliged by council to have that back in place.
Yeah, I realise that.
In just over a year. And so without starting that conversation, I think that simply putting lines and requirements back in a district plan without those broader conversations over the next year is going to be a real problem for the community as well. And I'm just wondering if making sure that you're involved in those conversations early, because we need to start them, is also really key for your community.
Yes, totally agree.
Yeah.
Communication's everything, and that
And as
hasn't
early
happened.
as possible.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you for your submission. And I'm aware that as a community board, you're clearly representing and advocating for your community well. What I want to ask you too, though, is as part of council, we've indicated you'll be aware that there's some significant risks to council if we proceed with option 3 as it is. So my question really, Kim, is would you as chair of the board be open for us as a council to considering a form of a hybrid model so we have some urgency attached to the works, but also that the whole concept of adaptation also proceeds?
Yes, the hybrid model is what David would be putting forward. I like one of the presenters before that talk about the risk, council risk compared to the risk to the people. And I think at this stage the mental well-being of our community is our greatest concern and should be our greatest priority as a council. And this could be readily, easily fixed. And I'm sorry that we have to keep pleading for this long, and the community do. I think it's shameful for all of us that we're actually sitting here today and not putting well-being before that we can mitigate those risks. Phil, we can mitigate them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to present and for detailed answers to questions. Certainly it's good to have the clear position of the Community Board in front of us as we consider this today, no more clearly expressed than by having the Chair and the Deputy Chair sitting in front of us. So thank you very much indeed for coming along.
Andrew.
Thank you. That now brings us to our final deputation on this matter, which is from the How team and a number of community members representing the How team. So once again, 10 minutes for this item to use as you wish. Thank you. You might want to start with just a couple of introductions as to who you are.
Absolutely, thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Corrine Bolstad. I'm a trustee of Renew Brighton. I'm just going to quickly explain the relationship between Renew Brighton and the South Shore and South New Brighton How team, and then I'll hand over to Marie, who's one of the community members of that How team. So Renew Brighton was formed in 2012 and we undertook various projects in the Greater Brighton community. By 2015 we were aware of extreme frustration in our community around the ways that we could be involved in making decisions on the matters that impacted us with various agencies, including council. In November 2015, we arranged a meeting where we invited New Brighton community representatives to talk about this. Our community representatives asked Renew Brighton to come up with a more efficient way of making decisions with agencies for the matters that impact us. And we asked council for a meeting later that year. So at the end of 2015 and again early in 2016, we met with senior management of council. And Renew Brighton invited council to partner with us in developing a more efficient decision-making process. Council supported us in that endeavour, and through 2016 and 2017, a great deal was undertaken to develop a process and concept which came to be known as the How team. In 2017, Regenerate Christchurch had a project which was about the future use of the red zone land in South Shore and South New Brighton, and Regenerate contracted Renew Brighton to form a How team for that process.
So, tēnā koutou and good morning everyone. My name is Marie Graham and I am one of the members of the How team and a resident of the South Brighton and South Shore communities. South Shore is my tūranga waiwai. I was one of the members that presented to you early last year, and I'm here today as the spokesperson for the How team. We firmly believe in the principle of nothing about us without us. The HOW team reflects this principle. Our HOW team consisted of 9 community members, including the convener, plus a member of each of the agencies, the 3 agencies involved, CCC, ECAN and Regenerate Christchurch. The approach is different because it focuses on how to engage, not on the issues. We produced the engagement plan for the project on time and under budget. While we are very disappointed with the delays and issues that have occurred, we are clear that this has not been the fault of the engagement plan or of the HOW team. The HOW team approach very successfully built trust in the community, and it was the subsequent actions of the agencies that has undermined that trust once again in the community. There is now a high deficit of trust in the community, which is going to require a significant investment from agencies to address. We firmly believe that in taking on the leadership of this project, the Council will need community-based advice on how best to involve the community in the decision-making process. This is the role of the HOW team, and Renew Brighton is keen to support us in its continuation for the project. The community members of the HOW team support the separation of the earthquake legacy issues from the long-term climate change adaptation issues. We recognise that while this was not the original intention of the project, the delays in the project mean that it would be detrimental to the welfare of the community not to deal with the immediate earthquake legacy issues, as has already been described by the community groups here. Both the earthquake and the adaptation parts of the project need to involve the community in a genuine way. The processes will be different due to the need to resolve the earthquake legacy issues urgently, whereas the climate adaptation planning needs a longer and ongoing process. As noted in our engagement plan and in the handout, the approach needs to foster community wellbeing, be transparent and responsive, prioritise face-to-face communication and show respect, and be inclusive. In respect to the climate adaptation part of the project, we are pleased to see the recommendation in the Council paper that the Council will use the engagement plan prepared by the HOW team. We strongly support this. It is essential that the community is central to planning for climate change due to the impact it has on them. This is consistent with the Ministry for the Environment guidelines to Council. Our plan provides a robust process. Good engagement and implementing the plan well will take resources, and so we need your commitment to this. It is only by ensuring an excellent engagement process that you will get the durable decisions that both the community and the Council can feel ownership of. Earthquake legacy issues, there is a balance between getting on and making decisions and ensuring that those decisions are the best ones. The community needs to be involved in an efficient and effective way, so the process does not drag. If people can see that the earthquake issues are being addressed, this will provide some level of certainty for the short to medium term. This will give the community the capacity to take on the harder challenge of how we adapt to climate change. Building on the work of the community, the HOW team and the agencies have already done, we can design a process that is timely and enables the genuine engagement. How you work with the community is crucial. Our experience in the HOW team gave us hope and encouragement that it is possible for the community and the agencies to work proactively together. We believe that an excellent engagement process will lead to the decisions that we can all understand and feel ownership of. We are not naive enough to think that we will all agree, but we want to ensure that the process we use to get to the end decisions is fair and transparent. To reiterate, a good process means nothing about us without us.
Thank you very much. Is that the end of the presentation?
That is, thank
So
you.
that does leave a couple of minutes for questions. Glenn. Yep, Glenn.
Thank you, Corinne and Marie. So this is a hypothetical. Have you got a sense over what might change in how to have a conversation about adaptation in other coastal communities in New Zealand that haven't had earthquakes compared to South New Brighton and South Shore? It's fair enough if you just want to say we're not going to guess, but have you got a sense of that?
I think it is hypothetical, and I think the beauty of these kind of processes is that they are defined by our community. You can see that our community has this very strong spirit, and I'm sure other communities do too, and that will create a different process.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, and I think that the work that the HOW team has done with support has been a really good example of how we should go about that in other communities throughout the city and district and Banks Peninsula.
Thank you.
It's quite time consuming though, and so with the work that we need to do to get our legal obligations filled with the district plan, how long do you think we need to be talking to our communities about the adaptation process before we sort of try and formalise things and put things in a bit of paper?
So it sounds like you want to get a grasp on how long that process would take all up.
Yeah, that working with the communities to come to sort of agreed information, sort of an agreed starting point where we agree with the facts, and then a way forward.
I think the engagement plan covers.
I think
that.
as long as the principles of the engagement plan are delivered in a timely way and well supported by
So that resourcing. Yeah.
Then that can be a timely process and achieved really well.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. I'll allow one final question from Yanni and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, hopefully just really quickly. I was really struck by the deputations today that talked about there'd been no analysis of life risk. Has the HOW team considered the issue of life risk and how it could be discussed or why it hasn't been discussed?
We, as the HOW team, talk mainly about process, so we've designed the engagement plan of how to have that conversation with the community. So it's not something as individual residents, and we have opinions on that, but I'm here today to talk as a spokesperson for the HOW team, so I wouldn't feel comfortable making a personal statement
In terms
in
of
that
the HOW
context.
team processes around discussing life risk, you have considered processes around that?
It has come up in discussion, but I don't see that as the responsibility at this stage, and this is my personal opinion. I think that responsibility lies with council.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for the answers to questions. Certainly all of the deputations that we've heard this morning have been valuable in terms of our consideration of the matter. I note the point that was made that there's been a relatively short time for community members and organisations to put those presentations together, and we thank you for the effort that you've taken and the time you've taken in doing so. So we'll now break for morning tea. After that, we'll come back and hear from the community boards, deal with the community board Part A matters, and then we'll move to item 22, which at this stage I would expect to be somewhere around probably 12:15 to 12:30, if those who have got an interest in that matter wanted to be in the chamber at that time. I intend to manage the next part of the meeting quite tightly. So we'll break for morning tea. And if councillors could be back at 11:20, that's in 13 minutes' time, ready to start.